Saturday, August 15th, 2026. On the southern tip of Hawaii's Big Island, floodwaters are ripping bridges apart and sweeping entire homes off their foundations. Hurricane Lala, a storm that strengthened into a Category 1 hurricane in a matter of hours, is nicking the coastline with just its eyewall, and it is still enough to kill one person, injure several more, and knock out power to more than 220,000 customers across the islands. Governor Josh Green stands in front of cameras and says something that should stop you in your tracks. With 28 inches of rain falling on saturated ground, he warns, there's going to be a ton of landslides. This is the closest Hawaii has come to a direct hurricane landfall in over 150 years, and while the nation's attention is locked onto the Pacific, an entirely different kind of weather emergency has been quietly building across the mainland United States, one involving record heat, a fragile and overloaded power grid, and a pattern shift so significant that meteorologists are calling it one of the biggest cool downs in years. But here's the twist nobody is talking about yet. Even as that cooler air pushes in, a massive dome of dangerous heat is going to stay locked in place over a huge chunk of the country, refusing to budge. And for the people trapped underneath it, relief is still weeks away. So today, I am walking you through exactly where this cooler air is heading, who keeps baking under extreme heat risk, what this pattern flip means for severe weather over the next several days, and which tropical systems brewing in the Atlantic you need to be watching right now. Let's start with the big picture, because 2026 has already been a brutal year for heat across North America. This most recent heat wave traces its roots back to late June, when a suffocating heat dome parked itself over the eastern United States and eastern Canada, driving Atlantic City, New Jersey up to a scorching 106 degrees on the 4th of July alone. By early August, researchers had tied at least 70 deaths to this ongoing heat wave, with the most severe cluster striking during a single holiday stretch, when 44 heat-related fatalities were recorded in just a few days, nearly 30 of them in New Jersey alone. A moderate El Nino has been quietly supercharging conditions in the background all year, and forecasters have been watching it intensify toward what some are now calling a potential super El Nino as we move deeper into the back half of the year. That single climate driver helps explain why this summer has felt relentless, and it is also exactly why the pattern shift we are about to walk through matters so much. Now here's the thing about this cooler air that is finally on the way. It is not a one-and-done deal. It is going to keep sliding in lower and lower as we push through the rest of August, and then really dig in once we cross over into September. The first half of this week is when we begin to see that cooler air trying to work its way into the central United States, the north central states, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the interior Northeast. But I want to be upfront with you. This cool down is not going to feel like a clean sweep right away. It is going to keep getting reinforced with heat, pretty much every single day through this stretch. So even though cooler air is technically arriving, you are still likely sitting in the 60s, the 70s, and even some low 80s across a lot of these areas. The real shift, the one that actually feels like a true cool down, starts to show up as we head into this weekend and roll into next week. And then we get another round of that cooler air arriving again for the following weekend after that. Unfortunately, as we move through this weekend and into next week, a lot of heat is still going to be hanging on stubbornly across the southern half of the lower 48. That heat does not want to let go down there. But as we push toward next weekend, that heat finally starts to mellow out. And you can see this trend clearly once you look at the latest model data. What we are watching for here is something called a negative PNA, which stands for the Pacific North American pattern. When that negative PNA sets up, it creates a trough across the western United States, while building a ridge of heat across the central and eastern United States. Wherever that ridge sits, that is where you're stuck in the heat, and you stay locked into it until a deeper, more robust pattern finally arrives to break things up. A positive PNA flips the whole setup around, bringing warmer temperatures out toward the west while pushing that trough of cooler air and stormier weather into the central and eastern United States. Based on the latest data, that trough looks like it is going to take shape and slide in exactly the way I just described, and the area of high pressure responsible for the heat is going to hold on more firmly across the south-central states, rather than extending its reach much further south. So if you live in that south-central region, you are going to be holding on to this heat longer than just about anyone else in the country. The European model's version of the PNA backs this up too, showing the pattern staying in that negative phase for a while longer, keeping that ridge of heat sitting right over the central and eastern part of the country. Eventually, though, that cool front does arrive, and we start to see it move through somewhere around the 20th, the 22nd, and the 23rd. Even with that front coming through, the southern half of the Gulf Coast region is still going to be dealing with a lot of heat and some seriously strong heat index values during that stretch. After that front passes, we actually swing back into a slightly negative pattern again, which means the heat tries to build right back in, though not quite as intense as what we have already seen, before we finally get pushed into yet another cool front as we close out August and transition into September. Looking even further down the road, there are already signals pointing toward a pretty robust winter setting up later this year, something worth keeping an eye on as we get closer to the fall and winter months. If you look at the Arctic Oscillation, you can actually spot a pocket of cooler air riding in right along with that frontal boundary, and this shows up clearly when you check the lower level temperature data. Walking through the days here as we move from Monday into Tuesday and even Wednesday, that cooler air pushes into the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and out through the Northeast. But again, heat keeps reinforcing itself daily all the way through Thursday, especially across the Ohio Valley and out through the Northeast corridor. Then as we roll into the weekend and head toward next week, here comes that next cool front, with warmth building out west while that cooler air sweeps into the central and eastern U.S. right around Monday. After that, yet another front follows for the weekend after next, and this particular one is the one that really pushes cooler temperatures further south than what we have seen with the earlier fronts. I do not want to oversell this. This is not some massive historic anomaly moving through, but it is absolutely enough to strip away a lot of that oppressive heat and pull a lot of that humidity out of the atmosphere by knocking down those dew points. Looking at Monday into Tuesday specifically, we are talking about temperatures running anywhere from 10 to as much as 15 degrees below average, stretching from the Ohio Valley out through the Northeast, and that continues into Thursday and Friday, with another really pleasant, cool front settling in. That second front, just like the one before it, is still going to fight against daily heat reinforcement, but it should perform a little better than the first one did. Out of everything we are tracking, the front arriving toward the very end of the month looks like it is going to be the strongest of the bunch. As we move into that next weekend, we are looking at a fairly significant cooler anomaly working its way through, though plenty of heat is still going to be mixed in as well. Unfortunately, as we transition from the end of August into the start of September, that is really when the bigger, more permanent change finally locks in. So get ready, because this shift is still coming, even if it takes a little patience to get there. Now let's talk about the other side of the story, because there absolutely is a hotter half to this whole scenario, and it is not something to brush aside. We are dealing with a lot of relentless heat, especially as we work through this week, and a whole bunch of extreme impacts tied to it. When I say extreme, I mean specifically that overnight relief is going to be hard to come by in a lot of these areas. If you look at the heat risk maps, you will notice the color coding. Red represents major heat risk, but purple represents extreme heat risk. And extreme is where nighttime temperatures just are not dropping enough to give people any real relief. That distinction matters enormously because research on past deadly heat waves has shown again and again that the events that kill the most people are not always the hottest ones on paper. It is the ones where overnight lows never drop low enough for the body to recover night after night that quietly become the most dangerous. For today, you can already see that red expanding, and by tomorrow that risk builds even further, stretching from the south all the way into the southeast. This sticks around for essentially the entire week, showing up clearly on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and even into Saturday. While that cool front eventually pushes through the southern half of the lower 48, that region is basically just going to keep cooking in the meantime. Because of this, the extreme heat risk zone has actually expanded out to cover the 23rd and the 24th, and it could stretch as far as the 25th. Pay close attention to those dates because that high pressure system is going to camp out over the south central states and essentially trap that region in a heat bubble while the rest of the country finally starts enjoying some relief from that incoming cool front. On top of the extreme heat itself, we are also looking at rapid onset drought risk developing across a pretty large stretch of the map, expanding significantly across Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Areas marked with dotted lines on the drought outlook indicate zones where ongoing drought conditions may either persist or actually get worse from here. As we move through this transition period, the highest level heat risk category does eventually ease up a bit, but we are still left with a solid moderate risk that is going to linger for quite some time, staying parked over the southern half of the country, all the way out to around the 26th and 27th, even as the rest of the nation deals with these incoming cool fronts. Since we are heading from August into September, that also means we are moving deeper into hurricane season. So let's talk about what is happening in the tropics right now, because there is genuinely a lot to track. NOAA's updated 2026 outlook has actually trimmed its forecast slightly, now projecting 7 to 13 named storms for the season, with 2 to 6 becoming hurricanes, and up to 2 reaching major hurricane strength, largely because that strengthening El Nino tends to increase wind shear across the Atlantic basin and suppress development. So far this season, the Atlantic has produced Arthur, which formed in the Gulf and brought record rainfall and tornadoes to the Gulf Coast, and Bertha, which made landfall in Louisiana and even triggered the state's first simultaneous tropical storm warning and extreme heat warning since 2005. As of right now, forecasters are also watching Tropical Storm Cristobal, along with additional tropical waves moving off the coast of Africa into the Atlantic's main development region, the stretch of ocean between Africa and the Caribbean, where many of the season's strongest hurricanes typically get their start. A lot of tropical activity tends to get steered by that same area of high pressure we have been talking about this entire time, which is exactly why this is a setup worth tracking closely going forward. As we approach the 24th and 25th, right around the time this bigger pattern shift is getting underway, models are picking up on a tropical wave moving past the Lesser Antilles and watching how that wave curves and eventually interacts with that larger cold front pushing through toward the end of August. The tropical cyclone formation chances show that system strengthening as it approaches the 24th of August, and beyond that point, the broader pattern we are heading into looks like it could start curving that system further out into the Atlantic. This could end up being nothing at all, but there is also a real chance for something stronger to develop, because the latest atmospheric data is showing a favorable environment with a good amount of lift in place, a signal that can be traced all the way out into the Pacific as well, largely because of that strong El Niño currently in play. As we head toward the beginning of September, there are a few windows where conditions look like they could favor strengthening, meaning we may see additional formation attempts. It also looks like a lot of the dry air and Saharan dust that has been suppressing development should clear out as we move into early September, though there is a chance it could return with another wave sometime around the middle of the month. Realistically, we are looking at the beginning and the tail end of September as the two windows where we will need to keep the closest eye out for tropical waves trying to develop. Before we get into the exact numbers, it is worth reminding everyone why this back and forth matters so much. A lot of you watching are in that in-between zone where you are technically getting a cool front, but it is not sticking around long enough to fully break the heat cycle. Every time one of these fronts pushes through, the heat tries to muscle its way back in behind it. That tug of war is going to define the next couple of weeks for a lot of the country. So do not be surprised if it feels like the cool down keeps almost arriving and then backing off again, because that is genuinely what the data is showing right now. It is only once we get into that final push at the end of August into September that we finally see a cool front strong enough to actually hold its ground. Now let's get into the actual numbers, because a lot of you just want to know what temperatures to expect where you live. Starting with the first half of this week, we continue seeing that cooler air filtering in from the northwest, working its way into the north-central states, the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, and out through the northeast, generally bringing highs into the 60s across those areas. Meanwhile, the south-central states remain stuck in the 80s, and both the American and European models are showing strong agreement on this temperature split. When it comes to daytime highs through the first half of this week, we are still talking about readings well over 100 degrees in some spots, reaching 110 degrees stretching across the southwest into the central states, the south-central region, and the southeast. Meanwhile, the northern half of the country warms right back up too, since that daily heat reinforcement keeps showing up no matter where you are. If you check the heat index maps, it feels like temperatures are running extremely hot across the central states, the south, and the southeast for this first half of the week. Moving into the second half of this week, temperatures drop even further across the central states, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, and out through the Northeast, with a real shot at 50s in some of these areas. At the same time, as we transition into that broader pattern change, we start seeing that ridge of high pressure build out toward the west and also strengthen across the southeast, which actually allows temperatures to ease up a bit across the Great Lakes and out through the Northeast. That said, heat index values are still going to run strong through the second half of the week, particularly across the southeast. Looking further ahead toward the end of August, we start to see readings drop into the 40s and 50s across the northwest. And that trend extends into the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the Northeast as well, with some spots even dipping into the 50s and 60s on the cooler end. For daytime highs during this stretch, most of these areas are looking at readings in the 60s and 70s. Unfortunately, a large portion of the south and the southeast is still going to be stuck above the 100-degree mark even at this point. Then, as we push into the beginning of September, this is where things really start to shift in a meaningful way, with temperatures dropping into the 40s, 50s, and 60s across a wide stretch of the country, and even daytime highs settling into the 60s across a good chunk of the affected region. Now, let's shift gears and talk about the severe weather side of things, because there is a good bit happening here too, and it comes on top of an already strained power grid nationwide. Nationally, several 100,000 customers are currently without power, with Hawaii alone accounting for a massive share of that total because of the flooding and wind damage tied to Hurricane Lala, which knocked out power to more than 220,000 customers across the islands at its peak. On the mainland, states across the Midwest and Ohio Valley are also reporting scattered outages tied to the same storm systems driving this pattern shift. As far as today's storm activity goes, we have got storms moving through Ohio, and we are also watching storms push across the mid-Atlantic region and into the Northeast. As this storm system continues developing, it is going to bring some troughing up into Canada, and this looks like it could turn into a fairly strong storm overall. The same system is also going to bring the potential for severe weather across the Midwest and the North Central states as we move from Monday into Tuesday, and it would not be surprising if that severe weather threat sticks around into Wednesday and even reaches into Thursday across the Northeast. So severe weather is going to be a recurring theme over the next several days. But at the same time, remember we are also watching that broader pattern shift take shape, with high pressure building out west and extending down through the south central states before that cool front finally arrives and pushes it out. So once that cool front gets to you this weekend, get ready to actually enjoy it. For today specifically, we do have a tornado threat in play, though it is a relatively low end threat sitting around 2%. Overall, the more likely threats today are going to be damaging winds and hail rather than tornadoes, with gusts up to 50 miles per hour and hail up to 1 inch in diameter possible within the slight risk zone. There is some indication from independent forecasting analysis that this threat could get bumped up a bit, particularly across northern Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. As we move through this evening, storms currently developing over Indiana and Michigan look like they are going to merge together as they move into Ohio during the early afternoon hours, forming a cluster of storms that pushes out toward the northeast. By around 3 to 4 o'clock, these storms begin bringing a heightened risk for damaging winds as they track across Pennsylvania and Maryland. Some of these storm cells are showing supercell characteristics as they move across western Pennsylvania and into Maryland, before eventually transitioning into more of a linear, line-shaped storm system that tends to favor a high wind threat over an isolated tornado threat. Given that, it would not be surprising if the tornado threat actually extends a bit further into western Pennsylvania somewhere around 5 to 6 o'clock this evening. We are also watching some storms forming over central and northern Missouri later tonight, which look like they will push into Illinois as well, bringing another round of potentially strong winds with them. Then for tomorrow, this entire setup basically circles back around to affect the central plains and the north central states again, with the bulk of that threat centered on Nebraska and western Iowa. By around 7 o'clock, we start to see additional development stretching from Missouri into Illinois. The official outlook does not currently include a specific wind threat category for that area, but based on the latest high-resolution model data, it is showing the potential for wind gusts reaching not just 50 to 60 miles per hour, but possibly climbing as high as 70 miles per hour as these storms track through Illinois and Missouri. That same threat extends into southern Ohio and West Virginia as well, where we could see gusts around 50 miles per hour, along with a separate area of wind concern over eastern Idaho, western Montana, western Wyoming, and eastern Colorado as these winds develop through the evening hours. So for tomorrow's severe weather setup, we do have a tornado threat area that includes parts of Nebraska and just a small sliver of South Dakota. Overall, though, tomorrow's severe weather threat leans heavily toward damaging winds, and that trend continues into Tuesday as well, where we are looking at both a marginal risk area and a slight risk area, both of which come with the potential for high winds and hail with gusts around 50 miles per hour, and an outside chance of some areas seeing gusts closer to 60 miles per hour. Severe thunderstorms, capable of producing large hail along with damaging wind gusts, are expected during the afternoon and evening hours on Tuesday, stretching from the central plains into the mid-Mississippi region. Rapid refresh model data, which has been tracking the system fairly consistently for close to 3 days now, shows a significant amount of storm development building up, especially over Iowa, where a strong wind threat looks likely. You can actually spot a distinct bow-shaped storm feature developing as it moves from South Dakota into Iowa during Tuesday evening, extending into southern Wisconsin as well, though it looks strongest specifically over Iowa and Illinois. There's also a secondary area of concern developing across the southeast for Tuesday, and current trends suggest this overall severe weather pattern is going to linger into Wednesday and Thursday as well, so we are not quite done with this active stretch just yet. Pulling all of this together, what we are looking at is one of the more complicated weather stretches of the entire summer. A hurricane skirting Hawaii and leaving hundreds of thousands without power. A stubborn, dangerous heat dome digging in over the south central states, even as the rest of the country finally starts to feel real relief. A genuine tug of war between cool fronts and reinforcing heat that is going to keep flipping back and forth for the next 2 weeks. A severe weather threat spanning tornadoes, damaging winds, and large hail moving across a huge swath of the country day after day. And a hurricane season that is just now waking up in the Atlantic's main development region, right as the calendar pushes toward its historical peak in early September. Every one of these pieces connects back to the same broader atmospheric pattern. And that is exactly why it is worth paying close attention over the next several days as this all continues to unfold. Stay tuned as this pattern develops further, because this shift has been a long time coming and it is finally here.